It's time for the second full garden tour of the season, June 23rd, 2020. Let's go! The first area we're looking at is our raspberries. These are perennials, which means once you plant them, you don't have to worry about it again unless there is some other issue. We have put grass clippings down like you'll see in the rest of the garden, which really helps with weed control. Very few weeds are coming through. But check out these plants. Beautiful raspberries, just starting to blush. Those probably have about a week before they ripen. Lush green leaves that you can harvest for tea if you'd like. And then some of our remaining zinnias that will be transplanted around the garden. One thing I want to point out, we do not treat our lawn. So while some may view this as unsightly and unkempt, this is clover that is growing freely. It is a great food supply to bring the bees towards the garden. We also use it for grass clippings, like you will see it being applied to all of the beds. Here is our asparagus patch. We are still harvesting asparagus. This is how they come out of the ground, looking just like asparagus. Once the asparagus come out and they're thin in nature, you let them go to fern, which means you allow that stalk to continue to grow, and it grows maybe 5 feet tall, and you have these asparagus ferns. It's what allows that crown to continue to develop and get energy so that next year you will have asparagus. Also tucked in here, you can see the big wide leaves from the strawberry plants. They have sent out their daughter plants, which means next year we should get even more strawberries. We have our garlic patch here. We are patiently waiting to harvest this in the next couple of weeks. It has been really fun to grow. It was, I believe, the first item up this spring. So when we took off the row covers, we had the garlic already growing. So it gave us encouragement to continue on, even though the weather was cold and we knew that a lot of work was coming. Our summer squash have taken off beautifully. We've gotten flowers. They've really taken off in size. But the one thing I want to point out, you can see that we have grass applied. It allows me to weed really quickly and without much effort. So I can go through and pick out any stray weeds that have come through. I try and do about a bed a day, depending on the weather. But for the most part, weeds are really under control. We've got a couple succession plants of summer squash, and then we get to our trellises where we do our melons, and we also do our cucumbers. This right here is a cantaloupe. Not sure if we're actually going to get melons. As I mentioned in our last video, we had a tremendous problem with cucumber beetles. Those cucumber beetles attacked our melons, our cucumbers, our squash. It was extremely difficult, and we're still having some sightings, but it's getting better. The one thing that wasn't susceptible to those cucumber beetles was celery. I planted a lot. It's been a lot of fun to watch grow. I come in and I just pull the stalks right off the side, and there you go, you have celery. So I will be freezing some of this, I will be dehydrating some of this, I will be sharing some of this. And then the other thing that's taken off right here next to our celery is we've got a small corn patch. Not ideally planted, but it's fun to watch grow. We'd love to get a couple cobs this summer. We'll see what happens. Cucumber beetles got to some of those as well. We have our turtle beans that have really filled in. Starting to see some flowers throughout, which means the beans are not that far behind. Transplanted a couple zinnias to encourage the pollinators to come in. And then you can see our plants. This is one of our cucumber plants, starting hopefully to bounce back from the cucumber beetle infestation. But here you go, cucumber beetle. So even though I have applied neem oil and DE, they are still taking up residence on the farm. Not nearly as bad as they were, but what that tells me is I need to go back in and I need to reapply where needed, either neem oil or DE. Here's a really fun plant to grow. This is our first year growing a cucamelon, or a Mexican sour gherkin. It is climbing like crazy. It grows these little tiny grape-sized cucumbers that actually look like miniature watermelons. So we are looking forward to harvesting and trying some of those in the near future. And we have our chive plant. Next up, we've got a combination patch. We've got bush beans here, we've got Brussels sprouts, we've got eggplant. If I take you down in here, you can see that the Brussels sprouts are just starting to form in the armpit. So those will continue to mature until they actually look like Brussels sprouts, at which point we can harvest them. You can barely see the eggplant over here, but look at this damage. Even though I've been treating, the flea beetles have chewed off holes in the leaves, the chunks in the leaves. We'll see what happens. We've got lots of other things that we can munch on from the garden. We've got a large patch of bush beans here. These are just green beans. And then on the other side of this row, we've got a couple extra cabbage plants, and we've got some of our cucumber plants here. The cucumber plants are finally starting to look a little bit healthier since the cucumber beetles really ate them away. They're enjoying the heat, they're enjoying the soaking rain, they are enjoying climbing up the trellis. This one's doing really well. You can see it growing up the side of the trellis here. Right next to this, we have our butterfly weed, also known as milkweed. It is the sole source of food for monarchs. Food for monarchs means we should have some monarch visitors soon. Our next row, we have not only some chicken damage here. 3 of my chickens got out and thought it was a great idea to come in and eat the leaves of my cauliflower plant. But you can see that we have broccoli that we've harvested. We are picking some side shoots. You can see that there are small florets, enough to make a meal or 2 yet. But we've started to pull them out and feed them to the chickens. I'll show you in just a second. We don't want to rob the soil of nutrients and allow these to grow when our primary harvest has been picked. So as we are harvesting the last of the florets, you can see some of those florets get rather big after you pick that main head. We're pulling out the plants, and because we can also eat broccoli leaves, we share it with our chickens. Here is the red cabbage. One of them has a little bit of issue, but we've got plenty of backup. And the one thing I've learned is plant more than you think you need. You will lose plants to chickens, to pests, to storms. You never know what a season holds for you. Here is that broccoli plant that we pulled out after we harvested. It was spent. The birds didn't seem to mind since the leaves are edible for not only us, but them. They had a snack or 2 from that. These beautiful purple flowers, no, they are not wildflowers. They are radishes that we've allowed to go to seed. There are seed pods that are developing. Here are some smaller ones. I'll show you some larger ones in a second. Those will be dried out so that we can plant additional radishes without having to buy seeds. Right next to the radishes, we've got our greens that are more heat tolerant. We've got Swiss chard and we've got kale. So if you really like greens and your lettuce has bolted, plant Swiss chard, plant kale. The size of these leaves, you can see by my hand, they're huge. And not only can you eat either one of these raw, you can cook them like you would cook spinach, sauteed in a pan with some olive oil, salt, and pepper. You can steam them. I also blanch them and freeze them. Here are those larger pods that I was talking about. These have the radish seeds in them that I will dry and then use for another planting of radishes. As we continue on down this row of hodgepodge goodness, we've got our red beets. I pulled the first one just the other day. You can see the shoulders peeking out. So we've got red beets in our future. Our shell peas are just about ready. We've done a couple harvests, but we want to make sure that the peas are fully developed inside. We've got some spinach that has gone to seed, and then behind the spinach we've got our sugar peas, that we've been harvesting and freezing and enjoying with our dinners. As we finish harvesting here, we're actually going to use the broccoli row and the cabbage row to succession plant some peas. We've got a couple cosmos that we've started and they are growing. Here, I'm not going to walk down the row, but we've got our Yukon Gold and our red potato patch starting to flower. We're going to be investigating in the next couple of weeks. We planted about 10 pounds of seed potatoes. We're hoping to get 100 pounds of potatoes. A couple random red beets that grew in there, so we're allowing those to go as well. It's fun to experiment, to be honest. A lot of this we've never done before. Right here we've got winter squash. We've never grown winter squash, but we're tired of paying for it at the supermarket. So we've got a couple different things that we're trying. We're doing some trellising of the winter squash. We are allowing some of the winter squash to grow on the ground. We've got cages around some of the smaller ones on the ground to keep the cats out and maybe deter some smaller animals from eating them. But so far it's working. I think I may have overplanted just a bit, but there's a learning curve. So I've never planted. I gave my best guess about how much space was needed, but you can see with just the couple of plants that I have here, right here, the spaghetti squash have absolutely taken over this area, and we're so early in the season. On the end, for fun, I planted a pumpkin plant, a Big Mac's pumpkin, and I have nowhere to go but out of the box. So in about a week and a half, this thing has grown 5 feet or more outside of the box. Last but not least, we have our tomatoes and our peppers. We planted both determinate and indeterminate tomatoes. Determinate tomatoes have a determined set size that they will genetically grow to. These Roma tomatoes right here where I am pointing are the only determinate tomatoes that we have. We also planted purple Russian, beefsteak, cherry, yellow pear, and we have a variety of different pepper plants as well. Check it out. Here's how easy those weeds pull out from the grass. Some peppers are starting to form. I believe this is a Crayola pepper, which is a sweet pepper. And the peppers are much slower growing than the tomatoes. They really like the heat of summer. But the tomatoes are coming along nicely. There's some of our Romas. What's nice about determinate tomatoes, not only do they have a determined size, but typically their fruit also ripens at about the same time. So if you're into canning, preserving, and you don't want to extend that for weeks and weeks and weeks, determinate tomatoes like these Roma tomatoes are perfect. We do can somewhere in the vicinity of 200 to 300 jars, at least that's what we've done in the past. We also freeze things like peppers. We use those for salsa in canning. We eat them fresh. We try and use a lot of different items from the garden to supply us with our veggies for the season. Here is our cattle panel. This is a brand new experiment for the year. Most of our tomatoes are in the round tomato cages, but this year we decided to try a cattle panel. It seems to be working. Last but not least, I have this experimental patch. It's got some lettuce, beans, zinnia. I'm all about experimenting, and you should be too. Experiment and plant more than what you need. Happy gardening!